For December 13th to order. Nikki, would you call the roll, please?
Certainly. Dan Bardoff, he is absent. Rich Jeffrey.
Present.
Terry Ellison. Present. Tracy Keene. Present. Nikki Matley is present. Cheryl McGuire. Here. Dylan McGuire.
Here.
Phil Vosberg.
Here.
Tim Wolf.
Present. All right. We have a quorum and we are in session. Just really quickly, for those of you wondering where Rick is tonight, I wanted to acknowledge his absence. He is out on medical leave for an indeterminate period, and he's unable to join us while he's on leave. So we'll carry on without him this evening. With that, I will be looking for a motion to approve this evening's agenda.
So moved.
Second. Got a motion by Teresa and a second by Phil. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. And now we'll move on to the exciting part for the evening. The reason all of you folks are here tonight, we're going to get to do some recognitions. So tonight we're going to start with Abraham Lincoln and Ms. Judd.
We're going to start. We actually have two students to celebrate from Abe tonight. So we're going to go ahead and start with Trent, if you'd like to come up. And Mr. Niemeyer is going to join us as his teacher. Trent is a fifth grader at Abraham Lincoln Elementary School, and it has been a pleasure getting to know him this year. You can tell when you walk in the room that Trent is a natural leader and that he is well respected by his peers. Mr. Niemeyer, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about Trent.
Yeah, this kind of came out of a funny way. It was like a month and a half ago, and we were talking about student month or something like that, and I'm like, well, Trent, when did you get it? And he's like, I didn't get it. I'm like, yeah, you did. No, I haven't. And then I remembered it was his brother that got it. And then I kind of winked at it, I'm like, I'm sure you'll get it before the end of the year. No, he is my right-hand man a lot of the times. He's always helping me out so much that I intentionally said I forgot to grab the milk so I get him out of the room and have other students write about you. I didn't forget it. That's why you were sent. And that's also why you had to go make a copy for me later on in the day too. You almost walked in while we were talking about you, so. No, but you know, he's always there to help academically. He is a star, just as a guy in the classroom. He's actually a great story just this morning during gym class. Without even bringing it up, Coach B leans over and he's like, he points at Trent and he's like, that's why he's student of the month. One of the other students with a disability was having trouble serving the volleyball, and Trent held it out for him and let him serve off of his hand. So, yeah, just to let you know, Trent, you know, word travels fast around the building. So, and I, as usual, had some kids write some stuff about you. I wish I could get them to write this much during writing class, so if you could help me out with that. No, but it was a lot of just like you being, you're a very kind person, you're funny, you're always there to help. Like caring person, paying attention during class, and trying to make people laugh if they're down, which you have a great sense of humor in that. And like, I know who wrote this, and this is a person who doesn't write very often, and they wrote a whole page about a bunch of nice characteristics about you. So you are very well respected by the staff, your peers, so keep doing what you're doing. Really appreciate you, bud.
Hi, Trent. I'm Rich. Board. It's great to hear these wonderful things about you, how you're caring for your fellow students and watching out for them and really being their keeper and building a community within your school. Those are all traits we really want to see you continue, and can't thank you enough for helping make Abe the great place that it is. So tonight, to help you remember the evening, we've got a certificate for you and then a gift card to Barnes & Noble for you to go buy yourself something there. Okay?
Thank you.
Keep up the good work. Thank you.
All right, and if I may, I also am here to celebrate Riley today. So Riley and Miss Quinn, could you come up? Riley is a second grader at Abe. You can often see Riley walking around the halls with that big grin on her face. She is a confident student leader here at Abe, and Miss Quinn wants to share a little bit about you.
Well, it's about time, right, Riley? Riley was our student of the month in October, and we're just really excited to celebrate you, Riley. I decided to take your name tonight, and I picked a special word about you, and it spells out your name. All right, here we go. R represents resilience. She never gives up, brings a smile and a positive attitude to school each day, and she always tries her very best. And she's great at showing others how to be resilient too. I stands for influential. She influences others with her kindness and leadership skills. She even influences me on a daily basis to be the best teacher that I can be. L stands for leader. She goes above and beyond to ensure that she is learning, and she also loves to help others learn too. She demonstrates acts of selflessness and inspires others to do the same. E stands for enthusiastic. She loves to learn and loves school. She comes in each day with a huge smile on her face. Y is my favorite. It represents that you are a yes kind of girl. She wants to help, lend a hand, give a hug, and do anything that supports those around her. If I could give this award every month, I'd give it to Riley, hands down. So you definitely deserve this. Congratulations.
Hi, Riley. Thanks for joining us tonight. We're happy that you're here with us. Just amazing to hear some of those qualities about you. The perseverance, the ability to, in a situation, just adapt and overcome and push through it and care for everybody around you. They're just amazing qualities. You're a really special person, and we're excited to have you at Abe. Please continue to do the great things that you're doing there to help everybody out. We've got a certificate here for you to remember the evening and a gift card to Barnes & Noble for you to get yourself something there, okay? Great job. Thank you. Okay, next up, we should have Mrs. Timmerman on north side. Yes.
Our student of the month is Jeremiahson. She's a second grader, and she's here with her teacher, Ms. Kaiser. So before Ms. Kaiser says some nice stuff about you, I just want to say she is just a superstar student in every way. She gives 110% in the classroom, always respectful not only to her classmates, but to all the adults. And one thing I love seeing in her is her love for school and love for learning.
Yeah, so my first board meeting ever, so it's kind of crazy. When Amy sent the email about choosing a student, Colby was the first kid that came to my mind. And then she goes, well, you know, you have to talk at the board meeting. I was like, oh, but it's okay. So Chloe gives 110%, like Amy said, at everything. She is just, last year she was all virtual, and I would have had no idea that. All thanks to her mom out there with her virtual school. Chloe just goes above and beyond every day in her academics and perseveres even when anything is tough. The best quality about Chloe is she is just so sweet and kind to all of her classmates, is always willing to help other kids anytime. We have a student in our class with a learning disability, and Chloe is every day helping her with reading, and it's just so awesome to see that. So I'm super proud of her and just super proud. So, yeah. You did great.
And Ms. Colby actually has something to say too.
Oh, my
Yes.
goodness.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes. This
Chloe, I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna say a quick thank you, and then I'm gonna give you the floor. Does that sound good? But it's just amazing to have you here tonight, and it sounds like you're on the path of being a lifetime learner already at second grade, and that's just amazing to see. On behalf of the board, thank you very much for everything you're doing at Northside. I've got a certificate for you and a gift card to Barnes and Noble for you to buy something, and I'm gonna give you the floor so you can say something.
I want to thank my teacher, Miss Kaiser, for nominating me to being Student of the Month. I was very surprised when my name got announced. I feel very happy and proud of myself because I worked very hard every day by doing my very best. If I can give any advice to my classmates, it would be never give up on doing your best, and hard work pays off.
On to Miss Tramey. Oh, I'm sorry, that is correct. Yep, for next month. Mr. Boehm, you are up.
So, the middle school is proud to announce that our winner this month is Sam Roy, sixth grader extraordinaire. Sam, come on up. Sam, you were nominated by Mr. Brueggemann, your music teacher, and some of the things that he had to say about you, and one of the things that really stands out, he's got a video that he made for you. Usually you have to wait for the Academy Awards to see stuff. He's actually across the street with the city band this evening, but he did a wonderful tribute, and we'll see that momentarily. But the thing, Sam, that really stood out to me is this quote from Mr. Brueggemann, right? Sam is a beacon of curiosity, honesty, and happiness. And he was effusive in his description of what you're bringing into his classroom and how you improve the space, the value that you bring, how you help other kids, and that those things, curiosity, honesty, and happiness, those are precious commodities. So thank you so much for adding those things, and I'm gonna have Ms. Wiltshire, if she can load that up, that would be wonderful.
Good evening. My name is Brian Brueggemann, and I am the middle school band director. I'd like to apologize to Sam and his family for not being able to be there in person this evening to share my comments. However, I do have another commitment. I do want to share with everyone else, though, in the room why Sam Wright is an excellent candidate for the Lamp of Learning Award. I've been extremely amazed by Sam's curiosity. Since we met in summer school, Sam has continually demonstrated his inquisitive nature. I would like to share just one example, his desire to learn theme songs from movies, specifically Jurassic Park and Pirates of the Caribbean. His eagerness to know and perform this music has led him to investigate the question how to perform notes, which the normal sixth grade student would not yet know. Sam, of course, then shares this information with his peers, allowing them to perform the music as well. Another rationale for Sam to receive this honor lies in his ability to challenge those around him. As a web coordinator, I recently had the opportunity to observe Sam in his homeroom participating in a web activity. Rather than allowing me to be a passive observer, he handed me a piece of paper and expected me to participate in the activity. This was done in a very positive nature. The inclusive atmosphere that Sam brings with him and fosters is something that master educators globally seek to implement in their classrooms. However, most importantly, Sam is an encouragement. As I stated in his nomination form, in the midst of today's sometimes dire news, Sam is a beacon of curiosity, honesty, and happiness. He enters my classroom ready to learn with a smile on his face. His warmth and enthusiasm are very contagious. The classroom is a better place when Sam is present. Sam, congratulations and thank you.
All right, Sam, those are some pretty amazing qualities. It was great to hear about the great things that you're doing in the classrooms. Your thirst for knowledge and your curiosity, hang on to that. That's going to carry you a really long way through the rest of your life. Just an understanding of how things around you work and the inclusion of those around you in the activities that you're coming up with, just amazing. So from the board, I wanted to thank you for everything you do at the middle school. Got a certificate here for you and then a gift card to Barnes and Noble. Great job, thank you. All right. We have Jacob here tonight?
Yep, Jacob's here.
You're up.
The Monroe High School Student of the Month this month is Jacob Kubley, junior high school. Yep. Jacob was nominated by Mrs. Carey, who's here tonight, and also Mr. Brown, another teacher who couldn't make it. And then Mrs. Ruff, who is our another teacher that we have at the high school. So they couldn't be here, but Mrs. Carey's gonna be here to talk about Jacob. The one thing I would say about Jacob is he is an amazing example of someone who shows growth and maturity through high school. I mean, going from the beginning to now, and I think you'll talk a little bit about that. It's just been amazing for Jacob. And he's taller than me, so.
So, Ms. Ruff wrote most of your nomination, and I just added a couple sentences, but I think she did a good job talking about who you are, so I'm just going to read what she wrote. Like many students, Jacob experienced a great deal of difficulty navigating through the school closure and then virtual learning last year. It was difficult for him to return to in-person learning towards the latter part of his 10th grade year, but he did, and he made the transition very well. Jacob has become a junior firefighter with the Monroe Rural Fire Department, a position that he takes very seriously and one that has become his passion. This fall, he took a full course load and is also taking Fire 1 classes on Monday nights and on Saturdays. As part of his work experience credit, he took on the responsibility of arranging to have a fire truck and other firefighters come to school, or he and the others explain their jobs and took questions from students. He helped make our most involved special ed students understand the importance of fire safety, while also helping them not fear the firefighters because of the equipment they have to wear. Speaking in public or in front of large groups has not always been easy for Jacob, but during the fire calls, he's learned the skills he needs to give clear directions to his coworkers. He has independently worked on this skill, which he was able to demonstrate during presentations to the classes. He has also taken on other speaking roles for classes such as speeches in English class and as a defendant in his Choices class mock trial. And then she said, I would like to recommend Jacob for Student of the Month, both because of his personal growth as a student and as the fine example of a role model he has become for our other students.
I think we should also say too, but now those classes are completed, right? And you are a certified firefighter.
Wow, Jacob, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
First, thank you for deciding to be a first responder and a firefighter. It's an amazing thing. You're gonna do great things and help a lot of people. I can't thank you enough for the effort that you're putting towards that. And everything else that, you do every day at the high school is just amazing. Especially, for a junior in high school, right?
Yeah.
Yeah? You're really exhibiting characteristics of somebody well beyond your years and embracing challenges that people who are older than you may not be willing to take on. They may just walk away. So thanks again for doing all that. And from the board, thank you for everything that you do. Got a certificate here to remember the evening, and a Barnes & Noble gift card, and excellent job. Thank you. Okay, so this evening we do not have our Monroe Staff Excellence Award winner with us tonight, but before all of our Student Excellence Award winners leave, could you all come up to the front, and then Ms. Boshar is going to give one picture of all of you together up here. So all of the recipients come on up. We'll have you stand right up front here in front of the board. This is better than squeezing you into the hallway. You'll thank me later. Mrs. Boshar will put you where she needs you. This is a new experience.
Like, when did we change this?
Smile.
I've done my hair. All right, certainly anybody is welcome to stay for the remainder of the meeting, but if you'd like to go, you're more than free to depart. Thank you for joining us.
She's ready to start walking.
She's a Tina.
Oh my goodness, she's so cute.
Good night. Very proud of you. Here. Find it on that.
Good seeing Sam. I get to see him on Tuesdays and Thursdays now. 6th and 7th grade are gonna practice. Take care.
Okay. So we'll move on to our consent agenda. Any board members wish to remove a consent agenda item for individual consideration this evening? Hearing none, we'll read them into the record. We're approving the minutes from the Board of Education meeting on November 22nd, 2021. Approval of receipt and expenditures November 2021. Approval of MHS Rocket Club. Approval of support staff resignation, Krista Zettel, back assistant to Director of Curriculum and Instruction. Approval of support staff retirement, Robert Kane, Northside custodian. Approval of support staff transfer, Kevin Austin, Monroe High School maintenance custodial supervisor. Lisa Kames to Parkside custodian. David Wang to District Administrative Center custodian delivery driver. Approval of support staff hiring, George Ellis, Monroe High School custodian. Laura Mom, Monroe High School custodian. Approval and acceptance of community donation, Monroe Women's Club gloves to Parkside Elementary.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion by Dan, second by Terry,
I will be abstaining from the vote.
and Nikki will abstain. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. We're on to public comment. Is anybody here for the purpose of making public comment this evening? Hearing no one, we'll move on to old business. So old business, our first item is discussion and approval of the Neola policy consent updates. This is our second reading, so we'll require a motion and approval. Does anybody have any questions or would like to have any discussion regarding the policies outlined under 7A? Okay, hearing none, I would entertain a motion.
I'll second.
A motion by Tim and a second by Teresa. By voice vote, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. On to item B, discussion and approval of Neola policy updates. This also is a second reading. So we'd be looking for a motion and a second. Does anybody have any questions on these policies under item B? Looking for a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Tim, second by Nikki. By voice vote, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. We're on to new business. This will be a first reading of policies that came out of policy committee this evening. So we will not be looking for any action this evening. We'll discuss them, and if we have any questions, I believe we can direct those to Ron, correct? Any questions on the policies? Okay, these will come back to us at the next board meeting for second reading and approval. And we are now on to item B. So this is informational potential action on school psychologist staffing. This is an additional conversation or a continuation of a conversation we've already started with Joe. And I think Joe is going to walk us through a little bit of the information again and then administration's recommendation.
I am. Jen, how are we doing with? Hope is that we can throw up the presentation that we had last time. I did add a little bit of information, but if it doesn't work, we will carry on and we'll be all right. First, I just want to thank the board for the opportunity to revisit this topic. I think we had some good conversation at our last meeting. And obviously it was necessary to give the board some time to think a little bit about this decision that's forthcoming. Couple of the things that I wanted to talk about tonight are specifically wanted to give you all, there it is, give you a little more information relative to some of the work that is happening within the building. In addition, I know at a minimum, Teresa and possibly a couple others referenced the perspective of the principals, and we do have a couple of our school psychologists here as well. Jess Lervick is there, wave Jess, and then Melissa Brandt is next to Jeremy. The others weren't able to make it tonight, so they're available should you have any questions.
The one that's in here is what you're looking at?
There's a couple of additional things, but for the most part, it's the same thing. I did update a couple things because we were trying to pull some data for the board for your reference, and it took a little while to pull it together. So is that going to cooperate, Jen, or not? Okay, it's not cooperating. So I'm going to talk at you for a little bit and give you a little bit of information. So certainly you all have the slides that was used for the last board meeting. A couple of things that I wanted to reference, just so you're all aware. You know, I think one of the things that we talked about was how COVID has played a role in the mental health of our students. And I wanted to clarify, and while it was asked whether or not this was a COVID specific issue, one thing that's pretty clear is that our nation, our state, certainly Monroe, has been working through a mental health crisis. There's a lot of data out there that points to this. Certainly, the national data indicates that pre-COVID, about 20% or 1 out of 5 kids were demonstrating some kind of emotional, behavioral, or mental health issue that we're trying to work with. It's represented within the suicide rates that we're seeing. We'll see if this is working now. Is our clicker on?
Do you need me out of your way?
It's got to be your fault, Nikki.
It's
as
my
I'm
head
pretty sure. No.
probably, right in front of the TV.
It's just the technology having fun on a Monday night, it looks like. So for whatever reason, are you able to click through those, Jen? Yeah, can we keep click? Another one, another one, another one, another one. Yeah, you're gonna have to endure all the animations. Sorry about that. Keep going. Sorry, everyone. Keep going, please. Another one, another one. Here we are. All right, so here's some of the things I was just referencing. So the suicide rates that we saw pre-COVID, now this is pre-COVID, were climbing over the years. From 2009 to 2019, there was a 44% increase in the students that were making a serious suicide plan, all right? Roughly the same period from 2007 to 2018, suicide rates, in other words, the number of suicides that were completed increased by 57%. So we know this is an issue. So again, my point, and if I didn't do a good job of this last time, I apologize, but to be clear, this is not a COVID issue. This is an issue that's been long-standing for our kids. COVID came in, hit us hard. Obviously, it's impacted all of our lives, and as a result, our kids are working through this a little bit. I like to think of it as, and we talk about this in terms of, we all have normal life that serves as our foundation. It allows us to predict how things work. Unfortunately, everything about our world has been shaken by this, and as a result, it erodes the emotional stability of our kids. And so we're trying to figure out a way to help kids. It doesn't help that they were out of school for a significant amount of time. If you ask any teacher within any of our schools, they will tell you our kids are not performing the way they once did. And it's not just because they missed the academics, it's because They missed a significant opportunity to develop their skills in terms of behavioral regulation, in terms of emotional management, and so we're trying to work them through that. So we had a crisis in place already, and then on top of it, we've had the pandemic, which has impacted it. Hey, the clicker's working now. Look at us, Jen. Who's having fun?
Nikki moved her head. I moved her head.
Thank you,
You're
Nikki,
welcome.
finally. So, you know, it's almost like well, I'll get to the U.S. Surgeon General in a little bit, but in October, there's a national coalition of pediatric experts that declared a national emergency relative to child and adolescent mental health. The report provided a number of recommendations, but they all basically pointed to increased funding and availability of mental health supports in the schools. And then just last week, the Surgeon General issued an advisory report detailing the significant concerns related to mental health. And one of the most prominent recommendations was that school districts need to work to expand the school-based mental health workforce. And so obviously those are things that I think relate to what we're talking about. Here's a few data points that I didn't share last time that our staff was good enough to pull together. I wanted to represent the number of calls to Northwest Connections. So Northwest Connections is a service that's contracted through Greene County Human Services. So this is the service that we call when we have kids that have been assessed and have making a very significant threat regarding suicide. And so, as you can see, as of today, we've made 26 calls to Northwest Connections this year. That gives us an average about every 3.5 days we're making that call. That's pretty scary for us as we know that kids are struggling, and I don't want to suggest that it's just a quick phone call and done. There are hours, if not days of work that are invested in every one of those students, and obviously we continue to monitor and support them as we go. Regarding the amount of acute inpatient care, we have 21 kids that have been served in inpatient care and have come back to us. And then we have many more that just don't have access to that kind of service. So ultimately what it means is we have a lot of students that need services on a daily basis, and the frequency and the need is well beyond what we've seen in the past. Our best estimate is that our mental health checks or check-ins with kids that have some real struggles, we're about 33% over what we've seen in the past, given our logs and the support that we're providing kids. I would say it's significant at all levels, but particularly at the middle school and the high school level. I had a conversation, or I had communication with Alicia Zelkowski. We weren't able to connect directly today, but you know, she stated, and Melissa's here so she can say whether or not she agrees with this, and Jeremy as well, that you could very easily hire a full-time mental health triage person in there just to greet people and provide support for kids because there's that much traffic coming through that office on a daily basis. So again, the last time I spoke to you, I really tried to walk this line of being respectful and acknowledging that our staffing ratios are very good here. When you look at our ratios relative to other school districts, there's no question that this district has invested in the mental health needs of our kids. I think the last thing I would say is, to me, it comes down to this. I think we have to make a decision as a district whether or not we're gonna make some of these important decisions based on staffing ratio comparisons to other districts, or if we're gonna make it based on whether or not we're meeting the mental health needs of our kids that we currently have. I can tell you, as a guy who's worked here for 24 years, this is well beyond anything we've seen before. It's scary, it's sad. I cannot sit here and honestly tell you that this position is going to solve all of it, because it won't. But it doesn't make sense to me to reduce a position, and I think we have to be clear about that. As of right now, the district has 4.8 school psychs built into the budget. What we're recommending, or what I'm recommending, is that we go to 5.0 versus reducing to 4.0. I just think we have to double down on the support for kids when they need it the most. So with that, I'll open it up to questions and do my best to answer. And certainly I'd invite you to ask any of the psychs, the principals, if they have any input as well.
You go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna, so Joe mentioned that in October, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Academy of Adolescent Psychiatry, and the Children's Hospital Association, they all declared a national emergency for mental health in children and adolescents. And you mentioned also, we're not alone in this problem. It's nationwide. They cited that there was already a troubling increase in mental health crisis amongst those adolescents, and pandemic only made it worse. The disruption in day-to-day life activities, loss of loved ones, caregivers, social isolation, all exacerbated the ongoing mental health crisis we already trying to navigate through. And then last week, after we had our last conversation, U.S. Surgeon General issued what is typically a pretty rare public advisory, specifically about that growing mental health crisis. And in that advisory, they provided specific guidance for educators, school staff, and districts. Some of those things they're requesting that we do, these are to actions that they're asking districts to take, and we do many of these things already. So create a positive, safe, and affirming school environment, expand social and emotional learning programs and other evidence-based approaches that promote healthy development. Learn how to recognize signs of change in mental and physical health amongst students, including trauma and behavior changes, and take appropriate action when needed. Provide a continuum of supports to meet student mental health needs, including evidence-based prevention practices and trauma-informed mental health care. Expand the school-based mental health workforce. Support the mental health of all school personnel, and a few others. So just based on their recommendations, one of them being expanding the school mental health workforce to really accomplish all of these other key goals and the work that administration's doing. I also do not feel that now is the time to pull back. I think now is the time to make that investment in our students and staff's mental health. So I do support the administration's recommendation. I'm interested in hearing comments from other board members as well.
Well, a couple of weeks ago, I was one that was on the fence, and I mentioned that I don't like to add positions that we may then change later. I don't think that that's always a fair thing to do, but at the same time, I really appreciated, and what really made me think about it the last couple of weeks was Tim's comment about even in the future, if we need to cut, this may not be where we choose to cut because of our mental health needs. And that, and then tonight, just appreciate you going back and digging in a little further and just getting some more data. I too support 5.
I agree. I think that I feel fortunate that we have a district who is able to provide those additional services and supports, and that we invest in those. I think they're critically important. And I think on top of what, the things that have just come out in the last couple of weeks, it might be good for the board to hear kind of what those multi-systems level of supports are for mental health across the district. What do they look like at Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, and how are those being executed? What are those evidence-based practices for serving the mental health needs of our kids? Because we know they're great and they're increasing. How are we doing trauma-informed care? And that might be good for us, because I do think it's critically important. And again, I appreciate every one of you who are out there working with our kids, because it's a critical time without a doubt. So I fully support it too.
We would love to have Melissa and Jess do a presentation.
No, honestly, we would, if the board would be interested, we'd love to provide that, because I'm very proud of our team. We've done a lot of work. I think we serve as a model across the state. We've used some practices that were not always used. We were early adopters, and now we're often being cited and sought out in terms of providing guidance to others with the work that we're doing. And not to, again, be overly dramatic, but we're all aware of some of the events that took place in Michigan recently. Jeremy, not to put you on the spot, but if you had to identify the number of threat assessments you've conducted this year alone, what would you put that at?
I think we're at 4 right now. So.
And that's just one building. I mean, we could go through each school has had their own experiences. And so, again, we're not trying to draw a direct connection, but anything we can do to provide support and connection and relationships with kids to keep them safe It's important for those individuals. It's important for our kids, our staff, our community.
I would just like to say, mental health is very important and important to me too. And I know Joe was honest in saying last time too, maybe a little bit this time, that we are staffed good right now. And Dan made a good comment last time about we would like more, how I'm sure a lot of people would like more everywhere, And I kind of look at the high school with our report card, maybe we need to do more there. I mean, I'd like to know, other places that really need help. If we're sitting, I'm not saying that we couldn't always use more. We could use 2, 3 more, right? If we needed. I'm just not sure adding right now if I'm on the fence about that.
I think that's a fair comment, Cheryl. I really do. And I tried to acknowledge that last time, and I'm trying to click through this thing to get to one of the slides. But Nikki obviously is in the way again. Jen, can you back up a few slides for me? I'm sorry to keep asking you. I just want to keep going. It's the first multicolored. There we go. So this was the one that I think is important to remember, because I think when we look at the school psych role in isolation, there's no doubt we have one of the best staffing ratios, not only in the county, but in the state. But I think if you look at this in terms of our total pupil services staffing, can you click that one more time and see what happens? Jen? Click it again. There we go. So if we were to go to 5 school psychs, that's where we would be as a pupil services staffing ranking within the area. So that includes, again, our school counselors, our school psychs, and the social worker category, which we do not employ. So I think it's important to remember that if you look at the school psych position alone, we use our school psychs differently. We use them in a way that allows us to integrate them into the buildings, into the staff, so they're part of the team, so they actually know kids and develop relationships versus jumping around from building to building to building, just working as a psychometrician. We don't have social workers in place because we're trying to utilize our psychs in that capacity so that they know kids and can develop relationships. So I think it's important to remember that this puts us at roughly the 68th percentile. So that, again, that's really good versus about the 50th percentile, but I don't think it makes us a huge outlier with regard to our pupil services staffing. But Cheryl, I can't argue with you. Your point is well taken. It's a good point.
I would just like to know where a lot of our needs are before we create a new position in other places too.
Joe, this position would be for this coming school year then?
Correct.
And that's if we can hire one, right? Or
I think I have a pretty good track record of bringing school psychs in, so it really comes down to timing.
that's what I mean, there's a window of time where you.
Yeah, there's not enough school psychs to go around for all the positions in the state. If the board were to approve going to 5 school psych positions, we would want to make that decision quickly, because once we get into February, they're typically pretty well gone. Not to say there aren't some candidates out there, but if you want your best shot, you need to get out there early.
I also see the listing that you kind of have of where people would be, but to Cheryl's point, if you're seeing more of a need in one school versus another, I trust that you're gonna be shifting workloads and having.
Yeah, so part of what I've talked about this with Melissa, I've talked a little bit about this with Sarah, obviously with the list that's there. And again, it's working again, there it is. And it's up on the board now. If we were to add this position or approve this position, it would primarily be for Abe Lincoln, serving the 4K sites in St. Victor School. But there's also some thought that there'd still be some additional time to provide some overload at the high school where it's desperately needed.
Okay. And does St. Victor not have to provide one of their own?
No, they do not. We're responsible for child find obligations, meaning that if there are special evaluations that need to be provided, we're legally obligated to provide those. In addition, there are some mental health needs for kids that attend that school as well, and those are our kids, they're a part of our community, and even though we're not necessarily responsible for that, we do try to provide that support as well.
Thank you.
Sure, good question. Sure, Jeremy, please.
Just to back up what you said, I know you've already said this, but I just think it's important for everybody to understand that we do use our school psychs differently. So when you look at, where we fall amongst all those schools, a lot of those schools don't use their school psychs like we do. They use them carrying test kits and placing kids in special education and the typical old role of school psychs. Melissa is on both of my leadership teams, disaggregates all the ACT data and all the data that we have in the building in relation to all the students in the school. So Cheryl, when you're talking about, how do we, improve that report card, that's part of that. I mean, she's looking at all of our data and determining and helping with the leadership teams, what is our plan for addressing those gaps and getting better. So she's doing that along with the mental health and along with the IEP stuff and the things that she's supposed to be doing. So I would totally agree that, yep, we're maybe overstaffed if that's all they did, but they do way more than that. And I know in the other buildings too, they're the right-hand people of a lot of the principals.
Ron, do you have any comment on financial impact?
Well, obviously, there's some additional costs that come back if we had this position. As I said at the last meeting, I think if we, and I believe everything Joe said, that there's some serious needs that are there. We thought that when we made the reduction, that, we could make it go. But I think we're seeing, although COVID has not caused these needs, there's an amplification of needs by COVID. And so I think we seriously have to look at that. As to some other areas of needs, we have an interventionist position at the middle school that's built into our budget that we hopefully will be able to fill next year, that we weren't able to fill this year. Certainly we have some increased ELL needs that we're addressing. We have it working for this year, but we'll hopefully be able to find a full-time ELL teacher next year. Some of these positions in the short run will be eligible to be covered by ESSER 3 grants. So when you talk about your interventionist programs, potentially even the psych position with the mental health component of it, we know that we didn't get additional budget dollars, right, from the state. So we're having to backfill our budget with ESSER 3 funds. We have to identify positions that qualify for us to use it to backfill it. And these certainly are positions that will allow us to make that. The other part that they haven't fleshed out at the state level is there is a MOE component of maintenance of effort component for the ESSER 3 funds. And basically at a very broad brush is what they were saying is that you need to maintain your funding for schools that are eligible for title. Certainly Abe's a title building. And so we were interested to see what the language was going to be to how we were going to navigate that with the reduction we had made last year in the school psych. If we bring it back, we certainly then don't have that concern of MOE to look at. I'm not saying that that's going to be a driver because they haven't yet told us what that MOE is going to look like. Some people are saying it means nothing, don't worry about it. Other people are like, you better have the same number of positions and dollars that you always had in that budget. And so I won't say that that's a consideration that in any way drives this decision, but it is something that's in the back of my mind that I've been a little concerned about if we, had made that, which we did make that reduction and we didn't have that position because the rules kind of came out after we were already down that road, right? Because we had made that decision the spring of the previous year, even before we went into COVID.
If we add the psych position, would the interventionist position still be necessary?
Yes, I would say they're kind of different roles. Interventionist position is at the middle school, and they've been, compared to certainly our elementary schools, they've been lacking in some of those intervention programs to help students move forward. And so we're each elementary, Abe and Parkside have both a math and a reading interventionist. Northside only has a Nicola's reading, right? Yes. Reading interventionist. A couple of years ago, the middle school had no interventionists, they now have a math interventionist, and we're trying to get a reading interventionist in place for them. So it was kind of like there was all this additional support at the elementaries, and then we kind of got to the middle school, it fell away. So that need does remain.
Any additional discussion? Okay. We would be looking for a motion then either to maintain 5 or maintain 4 school psychs.
I'll make a motion to maintain 5.
Ron, just to clarify, since it was previously 4.8, should the motion state an increase to 5? What would you prefer?
Right now it's 4, so I would say it's an increase from 4 to 5, so that's fine. And to echo, I think what Joe said, I do appreciate the conversation on this, because I've been a very big proponent of we can't make our decisions in a vacuum, right? We know in the big picture, long-term, we do have reductions over time that we're gonna need to make, and so, but again, I also see the needs right now, and so I appreciate the people who give regard to my budget, because you hear me preach it a lot, but I mean, there are times when things have to be looked at, so.
So I'm clear, she made a motion, but we'll say to increase to 5? Because right now it says to maintain.
We need to hear.
You could say increase one position, that might get you.
Make a motion to increase from 4.8 to, or 4 to 5.
School psychologists.
School psychs.
Okay. Got a motion by Terry.
I'll second that.
And a second by Tim. To increase to 5 school psychologist positions in the district as recommended by Joe Monroe, Director of Pupil Services. Any additional discussion before we? Okay. We'll do it by voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay.
No.
Nay.
Motion carries. We are on to item C. It's informational potential action on our district facilities survey for January 2022. Administration brought us the draft facilities survey at the last meeting. We gave some feedback to Ron, and then I believe he's made some changes.
Yes, so we basically circled back to school perceptions with the survey, and you'll see 2 documents attached. One is the survey after the changes that we talked about implementing, and as well as the timeline for what we're looking at for moving forward. So with the changes, some of them were verbatim what we said we were gonna change, and one that probably changed a little differently, we talked about if we did option 1, addressing the 7-12 option, that, the expected extended life of the high school is 40 to 60 years. And so somebody had said, well, we probably should say it's 80 years for the expected life of the new high school. And then as their team looked at that, they decided we probably are better off not really stating either, because the reality, as we know, is there's going to be other referendums and changes to those buildings over those 40 to 60 or 80 years. And so I think they just kind of removed the years. If you look at our current high school has been there 70 years, and you have, a couple additions in the 50s, one in the 60s, I don't know if there's any in the 70s. Then there was another one in the 90s. So our quote new latest edition was 25 years ago. So the reality is that building is approaching 80 years, it's 70 years old. But it wasn't like you built it and then it sat there for 80 years unchanged. And so they thought, rather than give some false expectation that the work on either would just be set it and forget it, they were better off removing those years. But otherwise, they pretty much incorporated the changes that we talked about, which I think we didn't have anything huge that we were concerned with. And so the rest of the format of the information and the questions all remain the same. I know I got them out to you last Friday, so you could get our, a week ago Friday, so you could get a first look at them. And so having not heard anything back, we can make some minor changes tonight, but they've now sent it out looking at the timeline, they've sent it out to the proofers, so the professional proofreaders are giving it a go over, and they may have, some small recommendations of language changes or punctuation that might come forward when the professional proofreaders look at it. And then with approval tonight, we'll get this sent out to the printers this week. The expectation is that we will email the survey out to our staff for their input after they come back in January, so January 4th. We'll email out to our parents, and we'll expect that they're going to land in mailboxes at our community homes on January 7th. And then the survey window will run through January 24th. They then hope to have the results potentially at already the first board meeting in February, certainly by the second board meeting, but they hope to then have it by the first board meeting in February so that the board can see those results at the first board meeting in February and then have some discussion about the survey results and the direction we want to go for the second board meeting in February and the two board meetings in March. And then we, with the intent that we may, by the end of March or start of April, have made a selection as to what direction we want to go moving forward with a referendum or not, and in which direction of the two we would like to move forward if there's one that looks like it's a more overwhelming favorite with the community than the other. And so that's the timeline we've kind of laid out as a board that you were striking for. And so by taking the action tonight to approve the survey, we would be able to meet those timelines for the board.
Any questions or discussion on this one?
Looks good.
Looks good.
I thought it looked great.
Yeah.
We have had it in some surveys in the past. We didn't with this one because we had two pretty clear choices that we were working between, right? And so we didn't want to just open it up because that sometimes then, starts taking you down a completely different path. And so we knew we had two fairly, strong choices that the board was considering. And so it's a pretty straightforward survey in that sense.
What was the question, Cheryl? We could narrow it down here.
section.
Oh, comment, like a free-form comment section? Okay. All right. If there's no additional discussion, I'd entertain a motion.
I'd make that motion. Second.
Motion by Nikki, a second by Terry, to approve the district facilities survey as presented by voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Okay, so our next item is discussion and potential action on the COVID-19 protocols. So you'll probably all recall that to continue to be flexible to unique situations, we had empowered Rick to make changes to our COVID protocols in response to impacts to operations and our staff and students based on his judgment and the data available to him at the time until the board was able to meet again to consider any changes that he made. So while Rick is out, we need to revisit the protocols and the delegation of that authority of the protocols approved by the full board. To that end, I'll be looking for a couple outcomes from our discussion tonight. I'd like to take them in this order. First, I think we need to discuss and possibly amend the protocols to authorize the Board of Education Executive Committee to make changes to establish protocols in addition to the district administrator during his absence. And that's to ensure timely responses to changes in the COVID landscape and to our operations. Second, after we cover that item, we're going to hear from administration on the recommendation to any changes to protocols and operations, including a possible staff augment. This is to support sustained in-person learning after January 3rd. And then this will include setting expectations for our return, for the school's return from winter break. And then as the last thing I want to discuss, I think we need to have a brief discussion about the communication plan to parents and staff about the return from winter break. what that looks like, just have an understanding of how we're going to communicate changes to our families. So on that first request there that I want to go through regarding empowering the executive committee, I'd expect any changes to those protocols to be driven by a recommendation from administration that we'd need to consider as they're monitoring the trends daily within our schools. We'd post and convene the executive committee, which is the officers of the board, and then review the recommendation based on that decision. And based upon the decision of the committee, the protocols would be altered at that point, and they would remain that way until our next full board meeting to discuss and vote. So in essence, we'd be empowering the executive committee in the same way we empowered Rick
In between each meeting.
in between each meeting. So does anybody have any thoughts or want to have any discussion on that approach?
I think it's an appropriate approach. First of all, well, the district administrator's not here. I don't think it's fair to land on someone else that's not prepared for that role. That's a pretty heavy burden. And I think it really should be, ultimately it's the board decision at the meeting, and to get us there, that's what we have that executive committee for. And so I think that's the appropriate way to handle it myself.
I agree. I think we've, Rick's had to play that role for us, to get in between meetings. So I think there has to be a process that we can go through if we have to make quick decisions.
All right. So to that end, I think what I'm going to ask for is a motion to amend our COVID protocols. If you recall that fourth paragraph that's in red, currently reads, the School District of Monroe Board of Education authorizes the district administrator to make changes to the below mentioned protocols as needed on a temporary basis until a special board meeting can be scheduled or until the next regular board meeting. We would amend that to read the district administrator and the board executive committee to make changes. If somebody would like to make that motion. Motion by Phil.
And or?
Sorry.
Or.
The district administrator or the executive committee to make changes.
Second.
Okay, so we've got a motion by Phil and a second by Dan. We'll do this one by voice vote. If anybody wants it to be a roll call, they can certainly say so. So by voice vote, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Okay, so that motion carries. So up next, during Rick's absence again, I felt it was important for the administrative team, it's the DAC team, to review current state and if needed, recommend any changes necessary, set some operational expectations for us and for the current, set some operational expectations for the currently board-approved mask optional date for January 3rd and bring forward their recommendations to support in-person learning. And you guys have a couple items for us to talk about that may require action. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Joe.
Great. Thanks. So first, obviously, with Rick's absence, the DAC team tried to step in and provide some guidance. We did have the opportunity to speak with our full admin team to gather some feedback and get a sense of what they're thinking at this point. And collectively, we all recognize that we're trying to work our way towards normalcy, but also recognize there's a lot of challenges that still lie ahead. As we went through this, we tried to look at it using a lens that focused on a couple of primary goals, which are, number one, maintaining the health and safety of not only the kids and the staff, but the community as a whole. And then also, really the thing we're trying to avoid at all costs is going back to a virtual education model, which I think we have a lot of people that have a lot of different perspectives and opinions on this, but I think ultimately everyone agrees that that's not what we want for our kids. And so we've kept that in mind as we put together the recommendation that was shared in the board packet. What I'd like to do is just go through this. We have it constructed kind of as for lack of a better term, a default COVID plan. In other words, this is what we would recommend based on the action that the board has taken up to this point. and then what we might offer as a heightened COVID response plan. And we'll talk a little bit about what would trigger that plan. So first, we wanted to acknowledge that the board has made a decision that we're going to a mask optional plan starting January 3rd after we come back from the holiday break. So that's been addressed in this plan. And then really what we wanted to do is maintain a lot of the practices that are currently in place. So it would be masking is optional for all. We would have a situation where contact tracing would be conducted for all positive cases. Quarantines would be put in place for those that are within 6 feet for a total of 15 minutes or more when individuals are inside school facilities. When they're outside, to be clear again, we do not quarantine people while they're outside at activities or recess. Our recommendation is that no quarantines are necessary for individuals that are vaccinated. We also would suggest that no quarantines are necessary for individuals that are wearing a mask. We also think it's necessary to expand the test to stay program using the rapid antigen testing. And rather than making that only available to students that have been subject to multiple quarantines, instead, anyone that's identified as a close contact would have access to that program. Ron's already started to work with Sam and taken steps to expand our capacity with our staffing in order to make sure that we can execute that program. There'd still be some logistics that we need to work out, but we feel that given enough time, we can put the right things in place. And our recommendation would be that that plan remains in place until we see a number of positive student COVID numbers that suggests we need to move to a new plan, which I'll talk about in a second, or the board approves a different plan. So as I just referenced, we wanted to build in a bit of a fail-safe plan. In other words, the default plan recognizes that we have to move forward and try to put our schools in a position where we have some bit of normalcy. But we also recognize that if we continue to see some trends that suggest that the number of student positive numbers are increasing and get to a certain point, we need to have something that can protect our schools. So what we would recommend is a decision rule that if we have 50 or more students that are identified as COVID positive, it would trigger the heightened COVID response plan. Now, for context, it's important to note that our high water mark for the number of students that have been COVID positive at any given time is 34. We have not approached 50, so we're not trying to circumvent the decision that was made by the board previously. We're acknowledging that that's the direction the board would like to move in. But again, we also feel that it's absolutely necessary to have something in place should our numbers become so high that action is necessary. And within this response plan, what we would recommend is at that point, we would go to a mandatory masking for all students and staff, everyone in the buildings. Now, when I say that, it's important to note that we have individuals that have plans that allow them to be exempted from masking. So we have students with disabilities, students with 504 plans. We have little ones that literally cannot keep their mask on. We're not suggesting that those would be wiped out. Those plans would continue to exist. But for all intents and purposes, we would recommend going to a mandatory masking for all individuals if we were to hit that threshold of 50. We would not conduct any contact tracing. There would not be any quarantines because everyone would be masked. And per the recommendation that we just made for the default plan, we don't feel that that's necessary. As far as the rapid antigen testing, that would also likely not be as necessary due to the masking. However, we would make it available as individuals are quarantined by Greene County Health, or if Sam, our district nurse, determined that it was necessary for other individuals to participate in that program. And then ultimately, the duration of the plan, it's our recommendation that it would be determined based on a 2-week average. And once we fall to under 35, that we would revert back to the default plan. So I think, again, the thing that we like about this plan is that, number one, it acknowledges the board's desire to implement a mask optional protocol. Second, we believe it's important to recognize that we've had a number of individuals that have addressed the board and requested options. We think this plan acknowledges that. So in other words, if someone is identified as a close contact under the default plan, they certainly have an option to be vaccinated. We understand that not everyone wants to be vaccinated. So the second option is you can wear a mask. If you choose not to wear a mask, your third option is that you can participate in the Test to Stay program. And if at that point they decline on all three of those options, then we believe that it's necessary to quarantine people. And then ultimately the fail-safe seems appropriate given that we can't predict what the future is going to bring. And if we've learned anything over the last year and a half, it's that we don't know what the future holds relative to this pandemic. So we're certainly open to any modifications or decisions that the board may have or make. Ultimately, this is the collective recommendation of our team, and I'd ask Ron, Todd, Sam to add anything that I may have missed or misspoken about.
Start, that's a good place, I think. Certainly for much of probably the middle of, I'm gonna look a little bit at Sam, from about the middle of November through about the first or second week of December, we were hovering around those low 30 numbers. And so certainly by moving to 50, it gives us a little space so that we can see if we suddenly don't have as many children perhaps masked at our elementaries. Is that going to cause a few more positive cases? And will that expand? And Sam, you can talk to where our numbers are today. We're hopefully finally, could be an anomaly, but hopefully we're trending down a little better.
Yeah, our numbers look pretty good today. At the time that I did the dashboard, we had 15 students positive in the district and 6 staff. I did add one more positive student as the day went on, but we're in a pretty okay spot. Our quarantine numbers are also really nice right now. So yeah, we'll see where we head from here.
Maybe this is a question for Sam. On the COVID dashboard, we have student COVID not vaccinated.
Mhm.
I mean, when we talk about 50 or 35, what numbers are we using?
It's a total number of positives.
So it includes vaccinated and non-vaccinated?
Yes.
And that would be staff and student then?
Yes. No, 50 would just be students only, right?
I don't know what it says.
Yeah.
What we're looking
students
at,
only.
it says students only.
Yep.
It would be vaccinated and not vaccinated combined then, right?
Because we are seeing breakthrough cases.
I guess that was one question I had. So in that number, let's say you had a staff outbreak. You had 25 staff members that were positive. It doesn't take into account any of those. Is there a concern that should that be included in a total number? Maybe the 50 needs to be something bigger to accommodate that, but.
I think we discussed that a little bit, and then really on the staff side, it becomes an operational factor, right? We can't put a number on it. We know when we can and can't operate based upon the number of staff that are out. So I would hate to amalgamate the two and so suddenly say it's, a combination of 60 or 65 students and staff. And suddenly if it's half of them are staff and only half of them are students and we're still at 48, but 24 staff are out, we might say we can't operate, right? Because we're 24 staff down and there's not many subs available, which kind of leads to another part of the conversation. We've been short-staffed on subs all year. And so much like at the last meeting, we talked a little bit about we're going to have to add some nursing time for the remainder of the year just to make sure we're doing our antigen testing. Our subline costs are down, but we're hoping to identify 3 or 4 subs who we can just say, you're here every day, right, for the remainder of the year. And then that, hopefully, if they're not part of our normal sub pool, that'll help cover some of our classes. With looking at our subline, that'll still keep our subline under where it's budgeted at, but hopefully provide some more people in those buildings because you're right, if we get if we get 20 staff out on a COVID outbreak in addition to regular illnesses or them having children quarantined and being out to take care of their own children, we wouldn't be able to operate. So that's why we didn't really put a number out there.
What would we do then, go virtual?
Let's say,
What would we do in that situation, go
we'd have to
virtual?
transition to go virtual if we had that many staff members out.
But what authority would we have, would this plan give us to do that?
We would have,
The
we would
executive
call the
committee?
executive committee and we would have to make that choice, just like we don't, whether we did that last year, we do that, it's like calling a snow day, right? I mean, if we can't operate, we gotta make a decision that we can't operate. The plan doesn't tell us when we can't operate. The fact that we can't staff our classrooms and, perform education to the way that we're supposed to be doing it, we'll make that decision for us.
And again, if we had 40 students district-wide, but 38 of them are at Abe Lincoln, where it's a smaller number, would the executive committee have to be the one that maybe shut that building down? Or,
I believe that's the recommendation we would probably have at that point in time, yes.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if it's that isolated, we would want to provide those numbers to the executive committee so you could make an informed decision regarding how you wanted to proceed. I think anytime we can provide clarity ahead of time in terms of how the plan is going to work, I think people appreciate that. Unfortunately, we've had changing guidance over time, and I think people have been frustrated with that. And so whatever the board decides to go with tonight, I think it's important to recognize and acknowledge that some decisions might be based on a district-wide basis, or it might be school-specific, depending on what the numbers indicate.
and then I got a question, you have, and there are no quarantines for individuals wearing a mask, does that again require both? Or just,
It's a great question, Dan. So we spent a lot of time talking about that, and ultimately what we wanted to do was, again, represent choice. And so if an individual decides that they want to wear a mask and protect themselves, we wanted them to have the ability to avoid quarantine. And so if you do it the other way, then you're always subject to another person's choices and behavior. And so, again, we wanted to encourage that behavior as a mitigation strategy and ultimately provide people 3 different options to stay in school. And we feel like this plan accomplishes that.
I had a question about that too. Can you explain that more? So that means, and operationally, how will that look in a building? Like, how are you going to be able to manage that?
Yeah, it's not easy, right? And it's tough for people to identify those that are consistently wearing their masks and not. What we've done, and I would ask, whether it be Sam or any of the principals that are here, we've had to utilize our camera systems to do contact tracing and identify those that have been in certain locations, and we would expect to probably use that same technology for those purposes. So ultimately, again, we want people to have the opportunity to make a decision with their families, with their children, and if they are wearing their mask consistently throughout that day that they're identified as a close contact, then we would not force them to quarantine.
To some degree, we're doing that right now. Right now, the requirement is that both are masked, right? And that if both are not masked, then somebody would be subject to quarantine. So we're already doing that with 2 individuals. Now we're just saying, for the other person, if you are masked, then the choice of the other person doesn't necessarily drive your quarantine, right? You can have the ability to protect yourself from the potentiality of going into a quarantine by wearing a mask on a daily basis.
And that's manageable in all the buildings by the staff?
I think so, based on the conversations I've had with teachers and principals as we go through contact tracing right now. Our teachers know our students. They know the ones that wear their masks well. They know the ones that wear their masks consistently. Just anecdotally from middle school and high school, the teachers are able to tell me who regularly wears a mask and who doesn't, so.
And we're already asking them if they were within 6 feet for 15 minutes, and they have to remember that as well, so.
So if they weren't wearing a mask, can they wear a mask and not quarantine? Or no?
It would be at the time of the potential exposure.
they would have to test negative to stay though.
But they do have the test to stay option. Yes, I sat in on a couple Greene County superintendent's meetings during Rick's absence. They're was one district, I believe it was Broadhead, who was doing a little research on a mask to stay program, which is essentially what you were just suggesting, Cheryl, which is, okay, if you wear a mask, you can stay. But there's not a lot of information available relative to that practice, and I'm
So you want a mask before in order to do that? You're wearing a mask before in order to know.
time of the exposure, yes. The rationale is that if you were wearing a mask to protect yourself, it's less likely that you contracted the virus, and therefore you would be able to stay.
I have a question on your, once we get to the heightened COVID response plan, I understand kind of the mandatory for all, that makes sense. The contact tracing, so even though my child may be wearing a mask now, or maybe was before, and I still think I would want to know that they were exposed to somebody positive if they're going to be put, their grandparents in jeopardy or other people beyond that. So that no contact tracing scares me, especially when we know that the COVID rates are high in the district anyways.
I was going to ask about that too. Do you think that's doable and possible? I know there's not, you're not quarantines, but so it'd be similar to what you're sending out now. Because I echo that as a parent, when, if that situation arises, then I know to be more heightened on
Look at
what,
their symptoms.
right? Or like if I want to do a rapid test, like those kind of things, I'm going to be more alert and heightened. So that would, I think, be valuable information for parents.
So it's a great question, certainly something we debated at length. I think it's easy to make that argument, and I don't necessarily disagree. I think we're also looking at it from a capacity issue of Sam and her team. And I'll say this because I know Sam won't. I think that team is being worn down a bit. I think, I'll ask Sam right now. I think Sam will say, yes, we can do it. We absolutely can do it. So if that's a decision that the board makes and feel is necessary, Sam, I don't want to speak for you, but certainly it's a challenge right now, right?
It's a challenge right now. It's a challenge right now. It's weekends, it's evenings, it's mornings. It's a lot right now. I completely agree that parents need to know when their kid's exposed. I'm not sure what that would look like. We currently function where if you're a close contact, you get my phone call, we talk about quarantine, yada, yada. In our kids who are vaccinated or who don't have to quarantine, because both kids were wearing a mask or something like that, then you get an email that your child was exposed. I'd envision it looking maybe a little bit more like that.
I
agree with that.
I would agree, yes.
I would agree with that.
Or even our classroom at the elementary level where someone in this classroom is positive, and we can't specify, but we want you to know it's there.
I would agree. I don't think you need to make, especially if you're not having, if everyone is, if we're at the heightened COVID response plan, everyone's gonna be masked, there won't need to be quarantines. So I think that email would be sufficient. I just think, parent, if you feel like, and hopefully if we can add additional nursing support so that you can have additional time, because I know and appreciate all that you have done, your whole team. But if you feel like that's something, with that additional time and doing something like an email is doable, I think that's important.
Because I do think that if we get to that heightened response, we're at the verge of, maybe virtual and some other things if we don't take action quickly. And the only way to do that is to have knowledge, people not, spreading it more by not knowing.
Yeah, so not necessarily the contact tracing, but just let the class, if it comes up in the classroom, just let the parents know. Simpler.
Sam, there are other districts that are already starting to do that, right? That are not using quarantines, but they're just using that type of communication.
Yeah, Broadhead doesn't quarantine at all. They just notify that there was an exposure. Yeah.
They don't quarantine for any reason.
Because they're all masked right
Oh,
now.
they're still all masked. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you for that clarification.
Joe, is there any methodology to the 50 and 35?
Well, in terms of the 50 number, we were looking at roughly 2% of our enrollment. We felt that was an appropriate line to draw to indicate that if we see over 2% of our student body positive, that suggests that we're seeing spread that is troubling, and we wanted to make sure that we represent that within the plan. We don't have anything in terms of recommendations from another body, organization or agency. However, it does align with some other practices of other school districts that have generally been using roughly a 2% number in order to dictate how they would respond to activity in the schools.
Clarify, you would kick into heightened if we had 50 students, vaccinated, non-vaccinated combined for one day.
Positive students, yes.
Correct.
Or it would be up for
For one
discussion.
day.
But the rates don't typically go way up and way down, right? It kind of goes like this and it comes back down.
We have had a few instances where we've had like 10 cases fall off in a day. So that's something that would probably be part of the discussion. I think the idea is that you've got a few things to work with, but we're not completely stuck.
And we have the 2-week average, Joe, so I think that's where Phil's question is that on the ramp up or just on the ramp down? I know we clearly spelled that out on the ramp down side. I don't know if it was, I can't recall if we decided that the day we hit 50.
Yeah, I think we were looking more of a snapshot. If we hit 50, that serves as an indication that things are quite troubling. You're absolutely right. Could we see a spike where we hit 50, 51 and then potentially have it come down? I personally feel that if we get to that point where we're talking numbers of 50, we're not in a good place and we probably need to take action. And it probably makes sense to extend that out over a period of time to make sure that we're absolutely comfortable going back to that default plan. That's not to try and take away anyone's rights or choices. It's that if we get to that point, there's some very real concerns in our schools. And again, the objective is to keep our kids in school. And that is the best tool that we have available to us at this point.
And it might not be that we're, acting on the instance, but as we get closer, reach that number, certainly that's when we would be contacting the executive committee to say, we need to have a discussion about this.
You gave the 34 number before, that was just students?
That was just students,
What's
yep.
been our highest rate of teachers, like the
Oh, well,
largest number of teachers?
highest number of staff at any one point is,
I have 9, let's say.
is that right for you, Sam?
Yeah, 8 or 9 staff.
Combined was 42, I believe, students and staff at one time.
I have a question about the test to stay. We've been doing it now maybe a month. How many kids have we tested that will eventually turn positive?
Yep.
Jen's good. I've been here messing with the clicker. It does not like me tonight. But we're gonna put some information on the board, so thanks for asking that, Dan. It's a good segue. So if you take a look up there, I indicated in the board packet that we wanted to provide some numbers. So let's just go through those, and as I touch base with each one of those, if you want to stop me or ask a question, please do, and likely Sam will have to answer it because she's very familiar with these. So the total number of positive cases year to date, so for this school year, we've had 251 positive cases. Right, Sam?
Yep,
Okay.
students and staff.
Yep. Number of confirmed transmissions at school has been 25, so that represents roughly 10%. The number of individuals quarantined is 799, so that's a lot of people that have been quarantined, which again was part of what informed this plan.
Can I ask you?
Please.
So right there, does that include, that's 799 individuals, or is that like we have some that have been quarantined 2 and 3 and 4 times?
It's that.
that.
It's not.
This is not people.
Not 799 unique.
That's a good clarification. Thanks, Nikki.
Yep, no.
The confirmed transmissions at schools, is that localized to one building or another?
Definitely higher at our middle and high schools. I'm sorry, by how much?
How much? Like what's the ratio?
5 at our elementary schools, so that would put about 10 and 10 at our middle school and high school.
So obviously the number of students quarantined that tested positive is 30, puts us at about just under 4%. Current COVID dashboard as of today said that we have 21 individuals, 15 students, 6 staff that are COVID positive. Quarantine, we have 63, 62 students, 1 staff. Our Test to Stay program, as an aside, I think it's been incredibly successful. Sam and her team deserve an incredible amount of credit for the work that they've done. We've been able to run 38 people through that program. 3 of them have been positive, I should say students, for an 8% positivity rate. Staff, we've had 7 participants with 1 positive, 14% positivity rate. And then those are the most up-to-date vaccination rates that we currently have. You can see that it's obviously lower at the elementary level. Part of that is a result of the amount of time that the vaccine's been available. You also know that the Parkside vaccination rate is less than half of what it is at the other 2 schools. We have some ideas as to why that might be. It might be relative to the population. We have a large Hispanic population at Parkside. There might be some concerns as to how that process works and the records that are kept. And so we've been working to identify ways in which we can reach out to that community, make them feel comfortable. Teresa, you're a person that we may be working with on that as well, given your role. But we know that that's a number that needs to go up. So that's where we're currently at. Dan, I don't know if that addressed your question or if you have anything else.
I have a couple of things. That Test to Stay, it's only been a select students that have been able to do that, right?
Yes.
Because I had a quarantine when I didn't have an opportunity, I guess, for that. But what I was going at it is if, I don't know, 8 and 14% eventually test positive, those are a little higher than the other numbers. Shouldn't you get tested, you're negative, shouldn't those students, I mean, they still have to test the next couple of days, right?
If you're gonna come to school.
Shouldn't they be wearing masks until day 7 or 8 or whatever, that when their normal quarantine can end, just in case? I mean, if 8 or 14%, that's pretty high. To me, that seems to be high, but I don't know.
Yeah, it was part of our thought process as we get into the actual, policies and nuts and bolts, that those students are asked to mask. We do ask them to mask now. I can't make someone.
Well, you
wear a
can if
mask,
you're not
but-
gonna let them back in the school, right?
Yeah, but I also can't follow them around all day either. So, the understanding is you're here, you're gonna wear your mask, yes. And the idea is that they would wear that mask through day 7.
I personally think it should be part of the Test to State program, but that's just me. And then, I don't say follow them around, but you certainly can have people spot check and things like that, as best you can, but.
Yeah, I think the concern is that we may not be able to manage through keeping track of everybody who has participated in the Test to Stay program and ensuring that they have their mask on. So if we have a requirement that they mask if they participate in Test to Stay, but we have no ability to enforce it, just operationally we can't, then I don't know.
We have an ability to force it. If you see the child not wearing them and you remind them and they don't, you send them home.
But at scale, what does that look like?
Well.
And the burden that it puts on the staff to keep track of who's allowed to be masked and who's not allowed to be masked in a mask optional environment. I get where you're coming from.
I think we veer on the side caution and safety, but I'm okay, whatever.
Sam, just a question on that. Are we seeing there was only 3, so do you remember if those 3 positives were on day 1 versus day 5, day 6?
Yeah, 2 of them were the first day that we tested them, so I believe they were on like day, I wanna say in the middle, like 3, 4. One of them was on day 5. I had tested that person 3 days in a row, and the 3rd day they were positive.
And so in terms of the progression of the virus, just so the board all has a similar understanding, what's your perspective in terms of how that progression relates to the testing, the Test to Stay program? In other words, do we feel like if we have negative tests on those days that we're doing a good job of protecting the students and staff, or just because we have negative tests doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to be vulnerable?
So the tests are about 98% accurate, which is phenomenal. All of the positive tests that we've had have come up positive on PCR too. Statistically, about 70 to 75% of people who are going to get sick with COVID are going to get sick and be positive by day 7. So I feel like that's a pretty good number when you're trying to catch these people day 7, 6, 7 for testing. You're probably going to have most of them by that point. I lost it.
Been a long day.
So if I've been exposed.
Yep.
And day 3, I test and I'm negative.
Yep.
But I don't test positive till day 4 or 5. Am I at a risk on day 3 of spreading it to other people?
You're still in your infectious period. So yes, you could still spread it to people. But that's where the requesting that someone wears the mask is going to eliminate that risk to others.
The, on average, I guess, when you have one COVID positive student on average, and I know it varies, but how many quarantines occur from one positive student?
At the elementary level, I'm probably looking at 4 or 5 right now. At the middle and high school level, anywhere between 6 and 12.
Depends who's vaccinated.
Right, and it's higher at the middle school, which reflects our vaccination rates. So as we head into this, I would expect at the elementary, we're gonna have a dozen, potentially, close contacts.
Just talking through scale. So if our high water is like 50, then that means you could have people who are qualifying for test to stay in excess of 300 people each morning. What does that mean? Can you tell us if that's even sustainable?
Well,
What does
half
that
would
look
be
like?
vaccinated, right, or close to?
You would hope,
Depending on the school.
depending on the school
right?
and the building.
Okay.
So I'll take the number down.
You gotta consider vaccination rates, you also have to consider that not everyone takes advantage of the program.
Right. We're probably 50% of the people that it's offered to have taken us up on it. So when you throw that into the mix, I think we're still in a doable range.
Okay.
We will have to talk about how or where we're doing that testing if we reach those points. But the tests are efficient and they're quick and they do a good job of looking at what we want to look at. So I think we're happy to do it if it means we get to keep kids at school. Honestly, it's kind of my favorite part of the day because people like me because I send them to school.
Well, and to that point, Sam, so some of our most vocal critics, as a school district, have taken advantage of this program and, have been appreciative of the fact that it's allowed their children to get into school. So while we certainly don't all agree on every aspect of this, I think a large percentage of people appreciate that there's one more option to keep their child in school. And again, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to figure out a way to keep kids in school in a manner that's safe.
And I want to thank Ron and Todd and Joe for this, and I'm okay with the plan, and, like I said, we can always change it if we run into something, so.
I think 2 things to monitor with the testing plan that we've talked about is obviously the operations and whether you can execute it based on the numbers, but also access. Because a lot of our kids and families, depending on where the locations are, do they have the ability to take advantage of that program, actually get there? Because they can't ride the bus, and a lot of our kids, especially at the elementary, do ride a bus.
Yeah, there's some definite equity issues and logistically that we need to figure out. I don't think any of us pretend that we're going to be able to answer all of those questions. But I think Todd's absolutely right. We need to figure out how we can make sure that this benefits all of our kids.
Okay, so maybe I should have known this. So if they're in the realm where they can test to stay, but they need to get to school to test, they're not allowed on the bus? Can they
Because
wear
they
a
should be
mask and sit
quarantining.
in a certain spot on the bus, or is there a way to help
Ron,
these
you
kids
wanna
get
speak
to
to this?
school?
Well, certainly there becomes some Well, the masking on buses required as it is, so, but there comes some real concerns with, you're in a rather contained environment. You can't really social distance too much right now on our buses with, I mean, for part of the route you might be able to, but I mean, it just becomes a real issue with, you're gonna be on that bus, some kids maybe half hour or more. Certainly all, by the time they even get to their first stop and swing around the district, are gonna be on that bus for 15 minutes. And so there becomes some real concern with that. I think obviously the other area where we would have to be real concerned or careful with is, we just talked about, our ability to operate with our own staff right now. What if we knock out, a half dozen bus drivers? We don't have an option to transport anybody, let alone the students who may be wanting to come in for the quarantine testing.
Have we asked parents who say, I'd like to come in, but I can't bring my kid, to say what's the holdup, or how can we remove that barrier?
I haven't had any parents tell me that transportation was an issue.
Okay.
So
I don't want to solve a problem, maybe if it's,
Well,
so what's
And I would like to
the,
contribute
yay,
to this.
So
okay.
transportation is a major issue
Okay.
at Parkside for families. We did have a couple teachers ask, because families that use cab service said, can we use the cab? And Sam had information that the cab will not transport people that are sick or potentially sick.
Okay.
So we were looking to use some community resources and services in our building. We have some cab cards and things to go get kids, to get them to test to stay, and the cab won't help with that either. So we do have some families that,
Okay.
even
So
on a
yes,
regular
it is
day,
a
like
burden.
if
So
there's
that
not
is-
the bus, they're not getting to school.
Okay.
So.
But even if we get them to school, they still have to have a guardian there, right? Because if they happen to test positive, they'd have to be sent home. So
Right.
we have to have a guardian or someone there present anyways.
That's the equity issue. Even if they did have a ride, we have parents at work that aren't able to. So that's probably why we only have half, right?
So for those families, their option is still to have their child masked under this plan. So if they are absolutely certain that they would not have the ability to transport their kids in the event that they could be quarantined for test to stay, I think it needs to be messaged to them that your kid needs to wear a mask,
All the
please,
time.
all the
Get
time.
vaccinated.
Or get vaccinated, which would be preferred.
Because then both of those go away.
Yes.
They don't have to worry about not having a ride or testing or.
Right.
Okay.
So they still have options to try to get to equity there.
And then you said there is a plan, because it sounds like some of that issue is language. So we have a
Our
plan to
ELL
reach.
team, has done a fantastic job
Awesome.
translating vaccination forms, sending that home in classrooms. So
Awesome.
we're starting, with some of that, just making sure that it's accessible to them from the language perspective. But, it's a fine line too when you're calling families to talk to them about vaccination, right? That's kind of a personal choice. So they provide the information in their language, but that's about all we can do, because that's all we're doing with our other kids too, is providing the information.
I'm curious, some of those that can't get there because of transportation, those issues, are they out all 14 days, or do they can some get tested at a Walgreens or something like that and come back after day 6 or 7?
Go ahead.
We've had a couple do that, that have come back on the, test on day 6, but many of them have been out the whole time, the whole 10.
Maybe we need some mobile plan, I don't know, to go out and test some kids.
Well, that's what I was just thinking. Is there any way do we have the ability to go to?
Sorry, Sam.
I'm gonna need to duct tape Sam together pretty soon.
And to answer your point too, we have, some of those same families don't have internet, they don't have a device if their kids' Chromebooks don't come home. So, Fast Care will see you if you're sick, but they won't see you if you're not sick. So even signing up online at Walgreens, like all of those things, some of our ELL staff have been, they're asking families, they're calling our ELL They don't phone even and have an saying, email. yep, can you sign me Send an up? email I don't to have email, how do I do this? So there's just there's some things in the community that are just challenging for people as a part of the process.
Yeah, and I think
that's the mobile plan is not a bad idea. I think what makes sense is we have to take small proximal steps into this plan, get it going, make sure that it's working, continue to collect data, see where our gaps are. And then if we realize that that's actually what's going on, then I think we have to look at some creative solutions to address it.
And it might be doing some of those tests at night. You know, it may not be the best solution, but maybe the test to stay that night beforehand so you can do it.
And don't worry, Sam, that wouldn't all fall on your team. I know what's going through your head. It's not, that wouldn't be.
No, I just know across the district, we're all hurting for,
Yeah.
for subs and staff.
Big load, for sure.
But it's something that I would be willing to work towards.
So we're certainly willing to alter, modify the plan, whatever the board feels is most appropriate. This was just our starting point to provide a place for you all to have a conversation.
I think it's a solid plan. The only small hangup I have is the one-day event triggering heightened response. You know, could we consider maybe a 3-day average? You know, if you look through the COVID dashboard, you know, that 34 to 36 is kind of the top end. But more often than not, it occurs for one day and it retracts. Not every time, but that's what it does. That would be my ask.
Yeah, the one, especially if you knew like you got a spike and you knew that 10 kids were coming off.
Right.
I could see that.
Is that a decision the executive committee can make then?
Yeah,
Well,
it
that's
could be,
true.
I mean,
It's just-
depending on what's
That's true.
driving,
People run
that's
right
true.
in.
yeah, depending on what's driving the spike. So if we had like a sudden spike up above 50, that could be something at the discretion of the administration that
And-
you guys may call.
And to
Have a
clarify,
conversation.
if whether we use an average or a one-day spike, to initiate the heightened response, are you expecting the executive committee to take action to initiate that, or will that just be done by administration? I'm just trying to clarify that.
My expectation would be that if we approve this plan, that action would be taken without the executive committee weighing in on it. Because the full board has approved this approach.
Which I'm fine with.
That's the way we viewed it as well. And I think, again, going back to what I said earlier, I think to the degree that we can provide clarity for the community, the better off we're going to be, because where there are gaps in the plan or things that aren't absolutely clear, people will find a way to hold those up and be very clear with us that we didn't capture that part of what was necessary. So yes, we would absolutely plan on executing that. If the board decides that it should be a 3-day average rather than 1 day, fantastic. We're open to whatever is decided. We just want to be clear about how that's going to work.
I think if you were just gonna do a one-day thing, hope that the board executive committee couldn't get to it in a day because they have to post the meeting.
We can post
Nope.
2 hours though.
Well, that's
In an emergency situation, which I guess we could consider a COVID outbreak an emergency
I don't think you can think
situation.
that an emergency, we all know that this is a possibility. I don't think you could rely on that all the time. I think you're looking at least 1 day, so I think that you should have a 2 or 3 day rolling average, in my opinion. I don't think you can rely on 2 hours when we know it's a possibility to happen. That's not an emergency.
So you're agreeing with Phil's recommendation of a 3-day average?
Yeah.
And then just to clarify the contact tracing, we said no contact tracing, but that an email would
They'd still be notified.
Still be
but there may
Family
not be
notifications could still be
that would
issued.
continue.
I feel like the intent of that was to acknowledge that if everybody is masked,
Correct.
there are no close contacts.
Sure.
So tracing becomes a lot less of a burden. I don't know if no contact tracing is actually happening, but it's
Yeah,
less of a
it's
burden.
just
Is
not-
that
okay.
accurate?
I really appreciate you guys putting this together. I think recognizing that we're still in the middle of this and that we had seen, I'm really happy to see things we'll go back down, but we were really high for a while, and so I really appreciate this. I think this is really important as we start to potentially look at changes in our plan to have something to fall back on. I guess if you can clarify for me, because the change that, it appears to me, the change in the plan that we had approved before really is with masking for quarantine. It says no quarantines for individuals wearing a mask. So I guess I want to clarify that, and then clarify if you have, just so I'm understanding, if you do test to stay, what the masking requirement is there.
So currently, if both people have to be wearing a mask to exempt the exposed person from the quarantine.
Okay.
Both people have to be masked. We're looking at now is going to just one person wearing the mask. So if the person who's positive has their mask on all day, great. They're probably not going to have any close contacts. If the person who's positive doesn't have a mask on,
Well, let me clarify that, because actually, I think the intent is that to say that it's individual control. So in other words, I'm Joe's student. I'm in a second grade classroom. I've chosen to wear a mask, or my parents have told me to wear my mask. I'm wearing my mask. Todd is COVID positive. I am now a close contact, but because I've decided that I'm wearing a mask, or my family has, I'm exempted from the quarantine. If Todd is wearing his mask and I'm not wearing a mask, I'm not exempt. It's specific to the individual. Does that make sense?
Okay.
It gives, again, I think we've heard it from multiple people that have come in here, and there's a lot of opinions, but I think to the degree that we can give our community choices, I think that's a smart move for the board and the district.
So then teachers will get a list of who those people are to know that they have to wear a mask for 10 days, like, what does that mean?
That's a
talking about
different
the
part of the
state? That's a
conversation.
No, I'm saying, so so I'm exposed, so I'm wearing a mask.
Let's go back to Joe and Todd. We'll just keep it
Joe and Todd are
consistent. So Todd is identified as COVID positive, and we,
You just have to be wearing a mask the day you were exposed.
correct.
Got it. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
job.
Thank you. There's no expectation you have to wear it for any.
It's not a commitment to the full year. We're saying at that day that you are identified, at that point that you are identified a close contact, were you masked? And we can use our technology to verify whether or not that was actually the case.
Do we have a lot of kids, though, that are wearing a mask on Monday and not on Tuesday, and then they do again on Thursday? You know, they're probably
No.
either masking or
Not
not,
all,
right?
now at the elementary, they're all wearing it, or
Well,
I
know,
agree,
but
at
I'm
the
just
middle school,
saying,
high school,
even
kids
at middle
that
and
wear. Yep.
high school,
No, I
if they're
think so.
choosing to wear a mask,
Yep.
they're probably wearing a mask.
Yep.
Okay.
So I think I'm hearing there's mostly support for this plan from the board. I just want to make sure that we understand, because in order for this to be accomplished, Sam needs some help. So we need to talk about that piece too before we approve this. I want to make sure we talk about the staff augment that our nurses need in order to pull this off, correct? Okay, so not that we can't have more discussion about the plan, I just want to make sure we also acknowledge that there's a cost piece to make sure that we can pull this off. So
Right,
let's
so-
talk a little bit about that.
Historically, our building staff have been under 30 hours because, with the federal law that becomes a benefit threshold. And so what we're seeing is we have a need for some additional nursing time. There aren't a lot of other nursing staff out there available that we can just add bodies in. And so what we had talked about at the last meeting, and barring any objections, I would look to have that authorization that we offer them the increase of time if they want it for the remainder of the year. That does a couple of things. It eliminates that handcuff on us on weeks when we're busy. It allows Sam to do some scheduling of her staff to either cover the antigen testing and or to give her some assistance on weekends so that she's not carrying the load every weekend if we're tracing quarantines. And so we may have some of the individuals who, because of whatever their life situation is, might not want that additional time. But I think it's great that we at least have that flexibility to put that in place, to relieve some of the time burden off of Sam, but also just in recognition of these folks, some of them would like to be able to help our students and us even more through this pandemic. And we keep bumping them up against this limit. And so for the second half of the year, it would be one of those things that we would have to look at. I think we're gonna have enough savings elsewhere in the budget where I don't think we're gonna have to use our ESSER funds to cover that. I think we'll be able to just do it out of our own budget. But there's also some costs with the antigen testing itself. Those antigen tests, I would expect that we'll cover those out of the ESSER 2 funds that we have remaining. We still have some ESSER 2 funds remaining that we've been using for ordering some masks and doing some other supplies for Rich's crew, but we'll certainly be using some of the ESSER 2 funds for the antigen testing itself. But the big thing that I think Rich was alerting to is making sure the board is all aware that we will be offering additional hours to our nursing staff for the remainder of the year. That will make some of them benefit eligible for that remainder of this year. They know that doesn't mean that that's permanent. That's, yeah.
That's good.
So understanding that, and I just want to capture the two, what I felt like I heard requests from Dan and Phil about the trigger at 50. You'd prefer to see that as a 3-day rolling average? Would there be anybody opposed to that change? No? Okay. Okay. So unless there's additional conversation about the plan or
Can
question.
you just clarify the other changes? So are we changing anything on the no contact tracing?
I was just gonna say.
Are we
that.
gonna add?
Well, that's why I asked
So,
that
yep,
before.
so let's talk through that. What do we want that to look like then?
Well, can it just be a simple like email to all close contacts?
So do you want it to say, contact tracing? I mean, we understand that the burden goes down, Sam, but what would accurately reflect what you're doing? Is it still to just say contact tracing and
Notifying
notification?
them, notifying.
So notification of potential close
Right.
contacts or
I
something
think it's
like
okay to say no contact tracing and then have, as Cheryl's, I think, was starting to say, notification of exposure. So you have like those 2 3-word sentences or whatever. Yes. Well, it could be by classroom at the elementaries, at the middle and high school, it might be, yeah, we wouldn't be tracing out what kid was where all day long, but it might be, there was a 7th grade exposure, right? They might have seen a 6th grader and an 8th grader, but we're gonna say that the exposure was 7th grade.
What I wrote based on that is that notification of exposure to families and staff. Does that accurately capture what's being requested? Yeah. Along with the no quarantines unless ordered by Green County and the no contact tracing. Is that accurate?
And where did we land with the test to stay and masking?
So for sure, I feel like they should have to wear a mask through the 7th day, which would be the last day of testing. If we want to be extra careful, we can go up to 10 or even the full 14. I mean, these modified quarantines are all with the understanding that you're monitoring for symptoms for the full 14 days after your exposure.
So the recommendation would be as a requirement of participating in test to stay. While you're participating in test to stay, you're required to mask.
I think the one thing I would say is it alters the intent of the plan a little bit in terms of we're trying to offer 3 options, right? And one of those was you can wear a mask. Effectively, what we're saying now is if you're participating in the test to stay program, you're being asked to wear a mask anyway, right? And I don't disagree. I think it's sound logic, but it takes away a bit from some of those options that we're trying to offer to families. Does that make sense?
It does, but they're a higher risk of potentially spreading it to someone else, and I think we have an obligation to protect the safety of others.
I don't disagree.
I will say that the couple school districts in our area that are looking at test to stay programs or currently use them do require masking for the time in which they are participating in the test to stay program. Not saying they're right or wrong,
But
And for us right now, we're doing that through 7 days, so it'd be
Yep.
those 7 days that you would be asked to mask.
Otherwise, if they were vaccinated, they wouldn't have to?
Right.
They wouldn't have been quarantined, right?
They
Yes.
wouldn't be quarantined either.
Yep, so you wouldn't have gotten to that stage.
Is everybody okay with that modification to the plan? Carol?
With masking through day 7, is that what we're saying?
If they're in the test to stay.
Yes. If they're in test to stay, only if they're in test to stay.
That's what we're asking of them,
You're asking of them right now?
Sam, what?
So that's no different from the current practice, except now we'd be saying it's required. We're just
And I think
requesting
for
it.
your
putting it in.
standpoint, it'd be nice if it was in the plan, then, right, you're not.
And that's what you want and recommend?
I
You
do,
would like-
I, yes.
I have another, is this the plan that we're gonna, this box here that we're gonna send out to people? This, would you create it here? I mean, the obvious thing with what I'm saying is quarantines, obviously if you're positive, should be quarantined, right? Do we have to put that in the box here, or is that just?
It wasn't our intent to create something that was ready to be sent out to the community, more so as a starting point for the conversation. So to your point, Dan, we recognize that we would need to be more comprehensive in our explanation to the community. We would still want to represent it in a visual manner that simplifies it to the greatest extent possible, but we also recognize that this isn't everything.
I just didn't know, because I saw this, I didn't know if we were approving, and then we had to.
It's a likely format that we would use, but ultimately, we're going to need to add additional details, particularly given the conversation that we're having right now.
And just a wording where you say vaccinated, we probably should have fully vaccinated so people have completed their
Thanks.
cycle,
Yep.
right?
Any additional suggestions?
It's good.
Buy a little time while Phil is out for a second there. So I appreciate the time the administration took to build this out. I think it's thoughtful and considers many, many options to achieve the goal that we had stated, to keep kids in school. And it's been an especially difficult year, more so than I think we expected at the beginning of the year. And we're very carefully trying to balance safety, presence, and choice. And I think that this plan does a pretty good job of doing that. I hope that we never need our high response plan. But like you said, we have no idea what the future holds, and things keep changing in front of us. But I think this gives us a good opportunity to keep kids in school to their benefit. So I appreciate you guys taking the time to build this out. Okay, so I'm going to be looking for a motion to approve the plan presented by administration with the amendments suggested by the board. Does that effectively capture what we talked about
I
tonight?
think we also need an effective date. I would assume January 3rd, but.
Beginning January 3rd, I think.
I would,
We'll include it in the motion, yeah, I think. Okay.
otherwise we approve it tonight.
Yep,
It goes
you're
until tomorrow,
absolutely correct.
right?
You're absolutely correct. Yep, so effective January 3rd. So if somebody would like to make that motion.
I'll move.
Motion by Phil
Second.
and a second by Dan to approve changes to the district's COVID protocols as presented, COVID plan as presented by administration with the amendments provided by the board effective January 3rd, 2022. Okay, and we'll make this one a roll call vote. So would you please call a roll, Nikki?
Okay. Dan Berdoff.
Yes.
Rich Jeffrey.
Yes.
Terry Ellison.
Yes.
Teresa Keen.
Yes.
Nikki Matley, yes. Cheryl McGuire.
Yes.
Dylan McGuire.
Yes.
Bill Vosberg.
Yes.
Tim Wolf.
Yes.
Okay, that motion carries.
Rich, just a follow-up question. How will this be communicated then?
And that's what we're gonna talk about now. So I wanted to take some time to talk a little bit about how we're gonna communicate this to all of the stakeholders, the staff, the parents, the kids. So if you guys are prepared to talk a little bit about what you think that's gonna look like, I think the sooner we get that to them, the better everybody can start to plan to those expectations.
And before we do that, you had asked us about funding for Sam's team. Did we need a
Oh my
vote on
goodness,
that?
yes.
Or
We
are
do need a, do we need a
What
vote
do
on
we
that
need
for
for
you to
that?
do that?
You don't with just the expansion of hours. If we were adding
were adding
positions, we
person.
would. Because we modify hours of support staff throughout the year to what's needed. I just needed to be, for my sake, I needed to be sure that you were all on board and okay with that. So if any of you weren't, I would definitely not be moving that direction. But
Everybody's on board with that,
Yeah.
that augment? Yes, okay.
Okay,
Thanks, Nikki.
no, that's
Appreciate
fine.
it. Okay, communication plan.
Sure, so I think one of the things that we've done well is we've provided specific communication for staff that was separate from our parents, families, and community. Obviously, we're gonna wanna communicate with the staff pretty quickly here. Obviously, we have some adjustments to make to the plan. And we have an in-team meeting later this week, and I probably would like some feedback from the admin team. I don't know if Ron and Todd see it differently in terms of what we would like to do in terms of rolling it out, but ultimately, what feels right to me is that we share the information and then have an opportunity for the staff to provide some feedback to principals, so we're aware of any concerns that might be out there. Ron, Todd, do you see that any differently?
yeah, and I think, partly is I think we make, even to parents, we might do an awareness communication and then with greater details to come, right? And then know that we're shooting for before break, certainly to get those greater details in their hands, so.
I know Jen and I have a social media marketing meeting tomorrow morning. This will now be added to the agenda, right, Jen? And so while we'll definitely want to send out something a bit more formal, we'll also want to make sure that it's represented within our social media work, because Jen drives a lot of the messaging for our district pretty effectively, and I think if we keep that in mind, we'll be well served.
Okay, so the intent is to get that first notification out to families by, when would you think?
Certainly before the holiday break. We have to make the adjustments to the plan. We have to do a little bit of wordsmithing. Going back to Dan's point, we want to make sure that it's comprehensive enough that we don't miss anything. I think a fair goal is that we get it out next week.
Yeah, and I think we may be able to affirm, whether it's through Jen or other ways, that the masking optional starting January 3rd, remains in effect. That could be like that shorter communication up front, and then the full expansion of the plan details certainly, getting out next week.
Has there been communication about masking optional January 3rd at this point? I mean, if you weren't.
If you weren't tuned into
watching
our
the
board meetings, I don't know
meetings,
that there has been great,
Okay. So then this would be the initial communication to all of our stakeholders
Correct.
to inform them that we'd be going mask optional. So I think that initial communication needs to provide all of the details.
Right, so then we would wait and do that next week if we want to do that, probably, because I don't think we'll have that this week.
I just think if we send out only, we're going masking optional January 3rd, but none of the other details will drive a high volume of communication.
Yeah, I think the goal is to have all of the decisions that have been made by the board relative to this plan represented in one document. Hopefully, we can make it as clear as possible, provide some visuals so people can clearly sort through it. And certainly, we can share some of that work along the way with you, Rich, if you'd like to see it.
Right, any additional discussion anybody wants to have on COVID-19 protocols?
What was this third one supposed to be then?
Those were all sort of there if we need them.
Oh,
type of deal.
Okay. Just want to make sure we weren't missing anything.
Yep, I think we're covered.
I just got a quick question.
Yeah, Dan.
Do we know if we're gonna have boosters available for 16 and above kids?
We were having that discussion today. I brought it up to these guys. I think what we kind of decided is the people that have gotten their initial series with us in the spring, that we would invite them to participate in an on-site during the day booster clinic at the high school for that 16, 17, 18-year-old group.
They would need a second reauthorization from their parents, but in that case, we know we would have had an initial from them that they would have participated in the initial round, and then we're now offering the completion of the series to them. Parents would
One reason
reauthorize
I
that.
asked, I just think we either have to make a decision, yes or no. If we don't, then parents know they can maybe schedule their own appointments. But if we're gonna do it at school and it's a lot easier, then that's one thing.
So your question, yes, the boosters are available. We won't have any trouble securing those, right, Sam?
Not at all.
I think the biggest issue is working out the logistics and the communication of that. And right now, our intent is to communicate with those that have previously been vaccinated, that a booster will be made available through school. But again, as Ron said, we would want to get an additional consent signed on that prior to
You have to have a consent each time that you get a vaccine.
Thank you.
All right, hearing no additional discussion, we'll move on. Okay, we're on to number 9, informational items. Boardsmanship, one recurring item is for board members whose terms are expiring. If you don't plan to run for re-election, please turn in your non-candidacy form as soon as possible. They're due no later than December 23rd. And Cindy will be out of the office that day, so try to get them to her before. Candidacy forms must be turned in by January 4th. For administration, is there any
Couple of
acknowledgements?
student recognitions that we thought warranted to be highlighted. So we have Chelsea Gilbert, who competed in a German competition. She's one of 16 students from around the U.S. that competed in Chicago. She was one of 2 winners selected to represent the United States. And so COVID permitting, she would get an all expenses paid trip to Hamburg, Germany next summer to represent the U.S. in the International German Olympics.
That's great.
That's a pretty big deal. And the other one is as well, Marissa Vosberg, who we know has been here to talk to us a couple of times in recent board meetings, has been selected as one of the 2 students to represent Wisconsin as a delegate to the United States Senate Youth Program. I think some years that used to be in person. This year it's online, March 6th through 9th. And in addition to that representation, Marissa then will receive a $10,000 college scholarship. So that's a pretty big deal as well.
That's cool.
Smile on
That's awesome. Congratulations to both of those.
Yeah, so those are, I mean, to have our students representing us internationally as well as at the national level is a pretty good testament to those 2 students.
Excellent. Very cool. All right. Board of Education correspondence, there was one that came in, I forwarded to the full board for consideration of the discussions tonight. We did also, I believe, get a copy of one email to administration that I think Ron is going to address. Committee reports will go around. Dylan? Nothing. Dan?
No.
Carrie?
No, thank you.
Teresa?
Curriculum met tonight and discussed 3 new course offerings for the high school: podcasting and broadcasting as an English course, social media for business as a business course, and Civil War, World War II in social studies as an elective course. And those will be coming to the full board at our next meeting for approval for new courses. We also talked about the launch program. I'm going to update on that.
All right, thank you, Teresa. Tim?
Finance also met tonight and went through the financials. In addition to that, we also will be bringing forward what was approved, a discussion around the administrative and exempt staff compensation study that we've all talked about. So that will be coming forward also for full board approval.
Phil? Cheryl?
Policy met tonight, and we just had a second reading on the non-discrimination and anti-harassment policies that we brought to the board, and we had another one too, so, but there wasn't a whole lot of discussion though, it was short and quick.
All right, thank you, Cheryl. Any agenda items for future discussion that board members would like to bring forward?
I think at some point we need to discuss, school report cards. I know it's probably a plan anyways, but I think we need to get addressing that.
I agree.
It doesn't have to be next meeting, I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying that one of the near term, I think we need to hear some, what happened, what's going on, what, maybe some fixes, whatever. If there's a plan, something like that.
I think some of those details were brought to curriculum, and then you're requesting we bring them forward to full board then, right?
I think yes.
Liaison reports. Do anybody?
Angie messaged me, she has nothing.
I don't see anybody from the press, so at 9:15, I'd entertain a final motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion by Teresa and a second by, I think I heard Terry.
There you go.
By voice vote, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those